Hi, Professor Maranci.
Hi. Corey, when I got the news that you were going to have that the graduate student cohort was going to have an event dedicated to animals and in art, I loved it. I think this is couldn't be more timely now that we're all living very closely with our cats and dogs in this moment of pandemic, but also because um, I think that imagery, artistic and visual expressions of animals give us really a wonderful chance to think about what animals are, what they are to us, what they are to themselves. And and so I am also a longtime horse lover and a horse rider. And so I also work with animals, not just as, sort of small animal pets in my house, but also work with large animals and try to create as harmonious a relationship as I can with them, given the fact that a lot of times I'm sitting on their back, which they may or may not like. That's another discussion. So yeah, so that's why maybe that's a good intro too for the image that I shared with you.
I can pull that up right now.
Great. Let me get my water.
Let's see. Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
I am. Great. Yeah. So I can talk a little bit about this image. When you asked me to share an image that I thought might be appropriate for your project, I kind of thought a little bit and then I chose this. I knew I wanted to choose a horse because a horse and rider combination for reasons I'll explain to you in a minute. But this is an image from a wonderful manuscript. Full disclosure, this is actually an image from a facsimile of a manuscript that is held. The original is held in Venice at San Lazzaro, which is an Armenian monastery. And it's actually on an island in the Venetian lagoon, and there a manuscript in the collection of San Lazzaro is this one, MS 424, is a manuscript shelf mark number 424, and it is an illustrated um, uh, an illustrated book of the story of Alexander the Great, as that story was told in the Middle Ages. So during the Middle Ages, starting already in the 5th century, there were stories circulating about Alexander the Great and his conquests and campaigns and his court intrigues and his going all the way back to his upbringing. And this became a very popular story that became known as the Alexander Romance, and it circulated all over Europe and the Mediterranean and farther and in many languages. And so this is the Armenian version. The Armenian translation of the Alexander Romance was made in the 5th century, but we have beautiful examples of illustrated Alexander Romances starting in the 13th century. And if I'm not wrong, this is the earliest one that we have. Then you continue to see them in the early modern period. So that's just by way of a bit of background to what you're looking at. And I'll say that what's interesting about this particular manuscript is that what you see in the black text is actually the 5th century text that's just been recopied and put here, and that makes up the black text. And this is a detail of the larger page, which is a lot of that black lines of text. And then within the red framed image, you have the additional text, which is text that was written later and kind of added in the medieval period to comment on the imagery and to comment on Alexander. So it's a mix of different kinds of texts. Now, in addition to that, we have the image itself, which shows us Alexander, and this manuscript has got many illustrations. It's copiously illustrated with images of Alexander doing his thing. And here you see him in one of his campaigns, mounted together with his flag bearer. And Alexander is seated on his famous horse, whose name is Bucephalus, or the bull-headed horse. And I think you can see that that doesn't really translate into how the head of his horse is shown. He's, by the way, the chestnut or the red horse shown in front. And then the horse in the back you can see is a gray. So yeah, so why the heck am I showing you this? You might know that, of course, equestrian portraiture is very common in the history of art. We see it all the way going back. You could even think going back to, I'm trying to think, the prehistoric images of horse and riders. And we see it in antiquity. You can think of famous Roman equestrian portraits, Marcus Aurelius, for example. You can see it in the Middle Ages. Think of examples of, I think, Charlemagne, or a sculpture purported to be Charlemagne on a horse. And of course, going into the Renaissance. So it's quite a normal, it's sort of normalized convention to show horse and rider. In antiquity already, we see it as a sort of way of showing the ruler. So it's an elite form of an elite convention to show the ruler on the horse. And that's something I talk about in the context of Armenian art. Busty, my cat, by the way, is just inserting his own meow into this conversation. But it's something I talk about in terms of Armenian art too, because it was just as true in the Persian world, in the Persianized world, as it was in the Mediterranean, to show the ruler on the horse. Now, I could go on and on. I hope I'm doing okay for time. I'm going to talk a little bit more. Am I good for? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, so I think you could ask, the first question would be, well, why? Why show a ruler on a horse? What does that, what does that show us? It's all very well to say it's a convention, but why is it a convention? Why is it something that rulers chose to sort of use to express their message over and over again in so many different cultures? And that actually takes me to a kind of another dimension of this, which is that on the face of it, you could say this is elite because you have access to to the resources. You have access to a horse. They don't grow on trees, which you probably know, and so that already means that you have control over resources. So that's something. But you could say the same thing for I don't know, like an ox or whatever, wagon, or a lot of different things. So again, it doesn't answer the particular question, why a horse? Why show the rider mounted? And so I think, and this is based not just on really not at all based on my art historical training, but my training as a rider, that I've come to understand why rulers favored or could have favored equestrian portraits, and what a ruler learns from riding. And we know that for young princes in the Middle Ages and in antiquity, riding and hunting on horseback were part of the preparation that one would have in order to become a ruler. So again, the question goes back to why. What does riding on horseback and hunting on horseback do for a young ruler? And from my own experience as a rider, but one doesn't need to have that in order to kind of deduce this, you need to be calm. You need to be calm in the face of crisis. And that is all very well and good, but it's not easy. And the problem with that is that horses can feel everything. And horses can feel how you breathe. They can feel how your heart beats. You can't fake it. So when you see and horses, of course, are animals of prey. And so they are looking out for themselves, and they are looking out for problems. And so hunting on horseback is facing a prey animal with a predator. And if you do not have complete control over the animal, you are going to fail miserably and possibly lose your life. And so what I have learned sort of in my own body, as well as in my mind, but in my own body through training, through years, decades of riding, is the importance of that developing a close relationship with a horse, getting the horse to trust you that everything is going to be okay. And for me, that might mean, oh, we're going by the scary door where someone could pop, someone who's like, pushing a wheelbarrow with manure in it might go by and you don't know. And so, it happens in any arena, whether you're facing a wild boar or you're facing an enemy in battle, or you're facing a scary, person who's mucking at a stall. I mean, anything could be scary to a horse, but it's always about that question of how much trust does that horse have in you? And it's about being calm, not just calm though, because calm is great, but if you're just calm and your horse is like off looking at something scary, then that's not going to work. You have to be calm and you have to be making decisions. So being strategic, having calmness and confidence in your plan is absolutely crucial for developing trust.
I imagine that takes a while to develop too.
Say that again, Corey.
I imagine that takes a while to sort of develop with your
Yes.
horse.
Which makes horses a really important resource, not something you pick up and you throw away. And I say that because in the modern sport horse world, where people compete with horses, very often that's what happens. If the horse doesn't perform well, you simply toss it, you get another. I mean, we're talking at the upper levels of the sport, or maybe the lower levels, depending on how you want to think about it. But these horses take time to train. They take time to accustom to and desensitize to war contexts, like Alexander and his flag bearer are riding right into. Now, there's another piece to this that is maybe also not something that is apparent to a modern person who doesn't have experience with animals, and that is the way the horses are shown. And here I want you to notice how the croup, that is the hind end of the horse, is lowered down, and the front end is raised up. And the horse's neck is arched, and that's very pretty. And the face of the red horse, Bucephalus, we can call him, is pretty much on the vertical. You also want to notice that the hind legs of the horses are stepping right in underneath them, close to where underneath their belly is. Now, if you were to show this to a Grand Prix dressage rider today, that person would say, this horse is in perfect balance. This horse is very collected and ready to do anything its rider wants, whether it's an extended canter, whether it is some kind of turn, because the horse's hind end, which is its engine, is already striding forward. At the same time, the horse isn't pushing and sort of falling forward. It's actually kind of lifting its forequarters up. It's lifting up. So the hind end's pushing underneath. The forequarters are kind of almost dancing. They're lightened up. And that is exactly what a Grand Prix rider these days, an Olympic rider, would be looking for in, let's say, some of the dressage moves like a piaffe or a passage. And it's no accident that the same thing that a good dressage Olympian, let's say, would look for now, we can see already in this 13th century manuscript. And I'm not kind of trying to enforce this absolute idea or kind of even a biological idea of how a horse moves, but in fact, it is biological. It is something that a horse that is listening to its rider, that is both active and using its body, but also listening carefully to what its rider wants, is going to look like that. And I don't think it was so different in the 13th century as it is today in terms of the way the horse is moving and acting. So this very beautiful pose with the arched neck and the head almost on the vertical, and the body, sort of the rounded hindquarters behind, and the lifted forelegs, is not just pretty. It's actually very functional from the standpoint of control over the horse. And also, of course, then by extension, from the standpoint of anytime you need the horse to do what you want it to do. And there is no greater moment for that than in battle or than in the hunt, when you yourself are in danger. So there's a lot going on in this image that may not be apparent, particularly to somebody who doesn't ride, and particularly to somebody who is living in the modern world, where you don't see horses every day, and you don't see people riding them and trying to train them and trying to control them. So,
yeah, well, thank you. That's so interesting also how you bring sort of your personal experience as a writer to read images that come up in your work. So that's so fun to hear. Thank you for sharing that. I guess I also wanted, so you sort of answered why you chose this and described it for us. I'm also curious what other projects you're working on now, just before we close.
Sure. Thank you, Lori, Corey. I was mixing your first and last names. I'm so glad you asked. So at this very moment, I'm actually trying to write an open letter to whoever will listen about what's going on with the Karabakh War with Azeris and Armenians. So there's been Azeri aggression, obviously now for almost 4 weeks. And this has meant damage to buildings in Karabakh and also endangers the medieval Armenian heritage in the region. And there are thousands of churches and monasteries in the region. So I'm right now trying to write an open letter to bring awareness to those monuments and hopefully safeguard them, monitor them, if necessary, document them. Because they're in a conflict zone. So that's my immediate, like, as of today, that's what I'm doing. And I'm also working a more like a book length project on the city of Ani, which was an Armenian capital in the 10th and 11th centuries, and is now in the modern Republic of Turkey. So I'm very busy with a bunch of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I remember those conversations coming up in class also. I miss us being in the classroom and the way that we did pre-COVID times, but I'm happy that we've had this opportunity to talk online and still share, and excited for the symposium, and hopefully we can come together for our love of animals then as well.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Corey, and thanks to the whole graduate student cohort for putting this together. You know, kudos to you guys for doing this.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Great.